I really did want to talk a lot about like your journey through podcasting and everything, because you're actually the first person I've had on my podcast that has their own podcast themselves. And of course, everybody linked to Porto's podcast is going to be down in the description below. So definitely be sure to go give a follow, give a subscription. You will definitely not regret it. One thing I do want to ask, what originally got you interested in starting content, starting your own podcast? Like, what was that spark where you're like talking to people for hours on end? I'm intrigued with that.
Yeah, well, again, it was one of those things that I'd contemplated for years prior.
Okay.
You know, I probably, if you were to ask me 3 years ago if I was more likely to be a Twitch streamer or do a podcast, I probably would have said podcast.
Oh.
It just, I feel like it sort of naturally suits my skill set and my persona. And, you know, it's something I like doing, chatting with people. And so, you know, content kind of came about, I think, through, I was having some Discord conversations with Cranberry Pudding off stream. We sort of became kind of close, and at some point I just thought we should just record one of these. We should just chat for, you know, because we would talk for 3 hours just about anything. I'm like, this is great stuff. Why don't we record? This is hot. This is the hotness right here.
It was the first episode, right?
This? Well, prior to that, you know, we were talking a bunch, and that's what sort of got the idea. I'm like, let's record it sometime, and that was the first episode with Cranberry Pudding, a 3.5 hour disaster that no one should ever watch.
I mean, I think there's good content in everyone. I've listened to like a good chunk of every single one of your episodes, honestly, and I
thank
really,
you, man. That's awesome.
I love each one of them because it's almost like you're the same person in each conversation, but you almost kind of like mimic a little bit to the person that you're interviewing, that you're having that conversation with, and they always bring like a new spice, a new kind of attitude and everything to the stream in such a great way. It's really, really cool. I guess with that being said, is there someone that you've been wanting to have on your podcast for a while but haven't got around to having them on?
Someone that I've been wanting to have on but haven't gotten around to having on. There are a few people. There's not really one single person I'm like, oh my God, I need to have them on, because, you know, I just sort of, that's just how I am, you know, when things happen, they happen. But there's probably like 4 or 5 on my radar right now that I'd like to have on. There's some people, I'll be really honest though, there's some people who I would love to pick their brain, but I feel they're a little bit too big for me right now. You know, some streamers that get like hundreds every stream or whatever, that I would like to have on, not because, oh, that'd be great for me, but just that there's a lot of things I'd love to hear about their experiences. You know, people who've been doing this for maybe a few years, veterans.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But, you know, there's no one person. It's a constantly evolving thing where, you know, I recently had, I actually last night put up Melissa Kim live, spoke with her for the first time. That was awesome. It's just people come into my periphery and I go, ooh, I'd like to speak with them. And, but no, sorry, I'm kind of talking around the answer. I'm not going to say any names. No, there's no one.
You're totally good. I've been feeling the same too. It's like there's a couple streamers who I've always wanted to have them on and just talk to them and pick their brain, kind of, because, you know, when somebody's has 100 or 200 or 300 viewers, you know, and you know, the amount of viewers that like we have, that 20, 30, 40 range, it's like, how do they do this? How do they keep up with chat then? How do they think of this and that and this? And there's like so many questions that you almost just want to pick their brain for. Not even in the sense of like you have them on your podcast to like boost your own growth or anything, not at all for that, but just like you're genuinely curious about how do you operate? How does your brain work? How does point A to point B become connected, you know?
Yeah, and what comes next? Because like in the journey that we're on, there are a few steps just in terms of having more time in the industry. There are a few steps ahead, and it's like, so what should I expect?
Right, kind of like getting some foresight a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So one question I have been wanting to ask as well, what are some best tips you've learned since you've started when it comes to long format discussions with people? I'm asking this as a podcaster myself, maybe picking your brain a little bit, but anybody else that is interested in starting their own podcast or just wants to get better at conversing with people. Do you have any tips that you kind of keep in the back of your head when you're conducting a podcast?
Well, I prepare. That's the first thing. I do prepare.
Very important.
Yeah. But my preparation is not, I don't over prepare, because I think you want to stay flexible and in the moment and be able to adapt to wherever the conversation goes. So if I have 10 points or however many that I want to talk with somebody about, if we don't hit them all, I'm not going to freak out and try and force them. You know,
right.
That stuff is there as possible fodder, conversation fodder. But I think, look, the most important advice that I would give is remember that you're doing a podcast, but also try and forget that you're doing a podcast.
It's like that 50-50 split in your head, right?
Yeah. Really get to know the person, really have the conversation with the person, and try and lose yourself in it. Try not to be thinking of, okay, how's this going to play off? And, you know, like just enjoy, like really enjoy the conversation. And that's a deeper one, is only do it with people who you think you're going to enjoy the conversation with, you know? Choose people that you really genuinely want to speak with, and then genuinely speak with them and just see where it goes.
That is some great advice, honestly. I think I really like the whole forget that you're doing a podcast, but also remember that you're doing a podcast, because it is very important, especially when it's just, you know, you're the only one in the room kind of doing it, like keeping an eye on OBS, making sure recording's still going, audio level's still good. So it's like you're remembering that the podcast is still there, but the other half of your brain is like, let's just go where our conversations take us. Let's talk about whatever under the sun comes to be, and just kind of live in that moment. I think that's great advice, honestly, Porto.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, it's again, you know, I'm just one guy, and I'm not like, you know, neither of us a Joe Rogan over here, but you know, that's yeah, that's what I've learned in my first, I don't know, 9 months of doing it.
Do you have a particular podcaster or two that was like that big spark of inspiration? For myself, I did listen to Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan has always been like a podcaster I've always loved to listen to, just because he has some guests on that are he just flows right away with them, but he has some on that I really like, that he's almost not battling with them, but he's almost having some more in-depth discussions, and maybe throwing back some ideas that they might not agree with, and having some of that disagreement in there. Are there any podcasters for you that have really been that inspiration spark for you?
Well, firstly, I agree with you about Rogan. He's you know, I think he's in the position he's in for a reason. He's a very adept conversationalist. He's very strong-willed, but also very empathetic, and very good at hearing people out, and very good at respectfully disagreeing with people. I think he has the perfect skill set that he's obviously honed. And obviously he's an entertainer, you know, he's been in that industry forever. So no, I think he, and they select great guests. There's been some legendary podcasts that he's done. Aside from him, I like sometimes I like other comedians doing stuff. For a while I was listening to a guy called Theo Von. There's another one called Tiger Belly with Bobby Lee and his wife. Do you know Tiger Belly?
I have seen that one. I've seen clips of that one. I haven't watched a full episode myself, but I have seen a couple. That's good.
Tiger Belly's funny. They have a good laugh. It's usually just other comedians on there, and they're just shooting the shit. Recently I've been I've been listening to, and this is more along the lines of a specific topic, as you were alluding to earlier. One of probably my favorite show of all time was Sopranos, and there's a podcast called Talking Sopranos with two of the stars, Michael Imperioli and Steve Schirripa, and they basically dissect each episode as fans. They've watched, they're watching it for the first time in decades, and it's this very in-depth conversation about what it was like to be there in the making of it, the creative process, because Michael Imperioli was also a writer for the show, and then what they take as viewers. And so that's a really specific two-person podcast that I've really enjoyed.
So they were they starred in the show, but they're like watching the actual episode for the first time themselves. Yeah,
for the first time in I think maybe Steve Schirripa might have watched some of them before, but I think Michael Imperioli hadn't watched them since they were aired. That's something cool. I learned, that actors often don't watch themselves.
Yeah,
which makes sense, I guess. But yeah, it's fascinating. It's really like high level conversation about it, but they're also just goofing off and talking shit. It's really fun.